Okay, now that we've received the transmission at the shop, the next thing that we want to do is start to do some inspections and compare the replacement transmission to the core that you removed from the vehicle. First thing I start with is I'm going to check the torque converter. I want to make sure that the bolt circle is correct and also the pilot that rides inside the crankshaft. Easiest way to do that is with a ruler. Just take a measurement from the center of the pilot to the bolt hole or stud of the torque converter. These should all be the same. That's going to tell you what the bolt circle is. Compare the replacement transmission to the core and ensure that it's the same bolt circle. The other thing you want to do is check the diameter of the pilot and also how far out the pilot sticks. You want to make sure that this is exactly the same as what you removed from the vehicle. This is what supports the front of the torque converter. If this is incorrect, then you could end up with a vibration or damage to the pump bushing or pump gear. You also want to pay attention to how far back the torque converter sits. If you take a straight edge across your bell housing and a ruler or a caliper and measure down to the pad of the torque converter, that's going to tell you what your setback is. The transmission that you removed from the vehicle, more than likely the converter is fully set back. So you could take the measurement off of that and compare it. The other way on most transmissions is you will not be able to get your hand behind the torque converter when the torque converter is fully set back in the transmission. It's important that this is fully set back into the pump gear. Otherwise, when you go to install this, you're going to damage the pump gear and you'll end up needing a replacement transmission. Also, you'll notice on the bell housing, there is warning instructions. In this particular transmission, it is a requirement to replace the transmission cooler. We do put that paperwork on the bell housing so you can easily see it. There's also an install packet as well as a checklist on what to do when sending the core back. Also on here, you're going to notice the colors of the tags. The red tags are going to be something that's going to be very critical, something that would damage the transmission if not followed. In this particular instance, there is a programming that needs to be done on this, as well as special fluid that needs to be used as well. This yellow tag here is actually regarding the shift adapts. Not something that's going to cause this transmission to fail, but it's definitely going to cause drivability issues. If you ended up with a green tag on here somewhere, it's more than likely regarding some shipping of the core. You're going to see on this transmission there's also another red tag here in the cool line fitted. This is also another tag regarding the transmission cooler. We want to make sure that the technician sees this information when they go to install it. That's why we stuck that in the cooler line fitted. This red tag here indicates that there's a bolt-on linkage. You want to be very careful when you're putting these linkages on. Do not use air tools when you do this. You will damage the linkage inside and we'll end up having to fix that. Replacement or possibly a field repair. Go to torque this down. It's best practice to hold the linkage in place while you torque the nut. That way you don't damage the pin inside on the rooster cone. Make sure that the case is all intact, there's no cracks or anything like that. The last thing you want to do is find a crack after you've installed it in the vehicle. Any cracks would be very evident because we do paint the transmission, so you would see fresh metal anywhere that there would be a crack. Vent tubes, make sure that your vent tubes, all that is in the correct location and it's going to work on the new transmission. This particular application is a four-wheel drive. You want to make sure that the pattern that the transfer case bolts up to is correct. Inspect all your threads, make sure that there's no damage to your threads. Also, look at the splines on the transmission. You want to make sure that the output shaft of the original transmission matches up with the old transmission. Again, you don't want to find out that you have the wrong output shaft after you've installed it in the vehicle. Compare that to the original, take a measurement, overall length, diameter, and count the splines. If you do have a drive shaft or some bolt-on yoke, you could just slide that on there to double check that it fits. Also on this transmission, we have a through connector for the electrical. You want to make sure that your pin count and configuration matches the original transmission and the wiring harness on the vehicle. On this transmission, there is not a dipstick tube like there are on many others. There's a cap. There would be either a dipstick here, or you would reuse that dipstick from your original. Don't send the transmission back until you've swapped these parts over. What I do is I take this cap off, and I'm going to add about 5 to 6 quarts of fluid depending on the transmission. When we dyno test these transmissions, they are full. However, once they get to shipping, we drain as much of the fluid out of the pan as we can. So it's going to be about 5 to 6 quarts of fluid to get this thing full. If you put the 5 quarts in while it's sitting on your bench, it's a lot easier to do that than to add the fluid once it's in the vehicle. Especially on this particular transmission where the catalytic converter, if it's a gasoline engine, is sitting right next to this fill cap. It's very hot. Also, I leave this snug, hand tight, because again, once it's in the vehicle, it's in a very tight spot where it's really hot. So it's a lot easier to be able to just back this off by hand versus having to get a wrench in there. When comparing this to the original, you want to make sure that all your mounting bosses are correct on the replacement transmission from the core. If this is a two-wheel drive application, there's a potential that it was shipped without an extension housing. This is because we're able to service more transmissions with one part number and have better stocking availability for you. If this is the case, your transmission would have came with a replacement output shaft seal to install in the old extension housing from your core. There'll be a tag on the output shaft with instructions to swap it over from your core. If for some reason the tail housing on your core was damaged, you can reach out to the tech support team and we'll send out a replacement extension housing directly to you. Also on the pan, you're going to notice that there's a heat tab on here. This heat tab will change to pink or red when the transmission fluid exceeds 260 degrees. If that has happened, reach out to us again on the tech support line. Something has gone wrong with the transmission cooler or potentially inside the transmission. And it's best for us to discuss this. All of our transmissions, you will notice that there is a sticker with a phone number to the tech support team. If there are any inconsistencies between this transmission and your original, please give us a call. The phone number to the tech support team is on the sticker on the pan. It's 877-866-8372, extension number 2.